Alright, it says I'm live. Can you see me? No? Alright, looks like we're up. Let's see if this link I posted actually works. So it says the video is not approved for Brick. Hey, Mr. Roebuck. So the firewall is knocking me out every time I put the link in, so we're going to always have to go through YouTube. The link will not work. I don't know why. Hello, viewers. Can you identify yourself really quick? Just so I know who's in and who's not. Actually, I'll make a list of who is and who isn't. Got 4 people. Let me know who you are. You can comment in the comment window. If you've never used YouTube before, you should see Mr. Roebuck's name and 2 comments from him. If you've not, I don't know what's going on. Hello, 5th person. Please let me know who you are, so we can start as soon as possible. We just finished our world history chat on the Russian Revolution, so that's fun. Hey, Coral, what's going on? Glad to hear from you. Mr. Roebuck, you should not be seeing any names unless they're commenting. I don't believe you see other comments. I can never see other comments. There we go. You can see it. What'd you guys think of the, what do you call it, video that I posted yesterday? Was it good? Hedessa, you're here! Hi, sorry about you coming in earlier. Like I said, I'm trying to space my classes out to make sure everybody has a chance to ask a question. So, Hedessa, do you want me to answer your question? Hey, Landon, what's going on? Do you want me to answer your question from the other chat, or do you want to ask a different question? Because I will answer the one you asked last time, because it's an excellent question. Thank you, Mr. Roebuck. So, if you're new, you just came in, please identify yourself. If you've already identified yourself, you can ask your questions, and I'll start answering them so that we can get a move on. Okay. Just to make sure, your same question, Hidessa, was why were women paid less for doing the same thing, correct? Pretty sure that's what it was. Or something along the lines of that. So, women not being paid equal to men is still a thing that's relevant today and still a thing that's happening today. Not in every industry, but there are certain industries where women are paid much less than men for doing the same exact job. Why is that? Women are usually not valued the same as men in the workforce, no matter what job it is. That's usually because of the employer or company policy that just has never been changed and nobody's challenged it. Certainly during the Homefront time, women were not usually at work. Okay, so we're paying women less because A, they're new to the workforce and don't know how to negotiate. B, they're usually not part of unions. C, we're in a time of war, so they're much less likely to put up a fight if we're saying, hey, we need to pay you a little less so we can buy the more expensive materials to help our troops. Okay? And the last reason is because they could. There were no laws against paying women less. Okay? So today, we're certainly still trying to break that glass ceiling and make sure that women are paid equal to men. But in these times, there really wasn't this mass consciousness for and desire for women to be paid equally. Okay, certainly there were people who thought that women should be paid equally. A lot of feminists in this time obviously were saying, we should be paying everybody equally. But the majority of people, including some women, said, no, women aren't as good as men. Okay, we should pay them less. I hope that answers your question. So you guys can start asking any questions you want. You don't need to wait. You can just start throwing them in, and I will answer them as quickly as possible. Okay. Even if it's not your question or comment from yesterday, feel free to ask anything that comes to mind, just so I know that you're participating and that you are actively engaging with the material. This will take a couple tries before everybody's comfortable and is just able to kind of throw your questions at me. I did this with my teacher in high school, and it was awkward the first time because we were like, oh, we don't know what to do. Just throw your questions at me, guys. I will answer all of them. Don't worry about me falling behind. Hidessa, you can ask another one, or Coral, or Landon. I'm hoping that as the weeks go by, more and more people will start watching these videos and joining us for the live chats. Fingers crossed. And if you guys know anybody, like if you have their numbers, encourage them to come on so that they can get points for the day. It'd be awesome if the entire class could be in here. Yeah. Did the women keep the jobs when the soldiers returned? So if they were in industry, usually not. Okay, usually the men came home and the women went back to being housewives, or their fathers or brothers or family members would pay for it. So if you worked in the industry, usually no, you didn't keep your job. The men usually got their jobs back. If you were in the military or were added to the numbers of nurses that were just rushing to enter the war, or if you were in the Women's Army Corps, uh, you usually kept your job. Okay, because there was still a need for nurses, there was still a need for secretaries and administrative assistants. There were still needs for the military to kind of wind down a little bit. Okay, and we'll talk about this more next week. But even though the war's over, we're still going to see a lot of tension around the world, mainly because of communism versus capitalism. Okay, the Cold War, which we'll get into in a little bit, is really going to keep everybody, armed to the teeth and ready to fight. So, like at the end of World War I, we were demobilizing. We were trying to transition from a wartime to peacetime economy. That's really not going to happen as much at the end of World War II. Okay, we're still going to be armed to the teeth and ready to fight. Okay, so there's still a need for the women who entered the military to stay in the military. Okay, but the only difference is the soldiers who were fighting, we don't need them to just, sit around and guard things. Now we're going to send them back to work, right? We're going to let them go home. Hadesso, why didn't anyone stop the government and FDR from throwing the Japanese camps and repeating history like Hitler? So first, this was happening at the same time as the Holocaust. So this is happening the same time as, Hitler's doing his stuff. So it's not really repeating history to that extent. But people didn't stop him because, remember, people are still very racist today, but back then, it was worse. Okay, back then it was 20,000 times worse in terms of racism. And not only that, but when you're at war, I know we haven't been to, we in your lifetime, we haven't been in a war that's a traditional type of war where there's two countries fighting each other. With terrorism now, we're in a war where these shadow people are just hiding in the shadows, they're lurking, they're launching terrorist attacks. So we haven't been in a traditional war during our lifetimes, including my own. But you can imagine that when someone's at war and you know that the world is going crazy and you were just attacked by a certain ethnic group, so the Japanese, and you're already racist and the people around you are racist, you're usually going to, stick with that idea. You're going to say, wow, these Japanese people, they might be empathetic, even though they're not citizens of Japan, or even though they may not be allied with Japan, they might be traitors. They might be trying to hurt us. Let's, if we send them to the camps, we're not killing them, we're not hurting them. We're just sending them to camps and destroying their lives, but at least we'll be safe. And this is only going to last for the duration of the war. Okay, so for a lot of people, it was like, okay, this is acceptable. We'll do this because we know it's only going to last for the war. And, we're not killing them. So there were tons of justifications that Americans were making to kind of appease their own sense of guilt. Okay, and some people were flat out racist and just said, of course, keep these people in camps. The idea of these people. So why didn't people stop the government? Racism. What would they have really done? The Supreme Court struck it down when people challenged. Remember Korematsu versus the United States? The Supreme Court was even like, it's okay to do this to Japanese people. Mr. Roebuck, I thought it was important for everyone to understand how awesome we need to hit on major points. So, just to hit on what Mr. Roebuck was saying, the wartime industries were just phenomenal. The speed and rate at which we were producing planes, tanks, weapons, anything, bullets, guns, whatever we're talking about, supplies. The rate by which we were producing was insane. You could build a ship or bomber in, like Mr. Roebuck was saying, in 3 to 4 days, there was, I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head. There was a statistic that said we could get what was it? I think it was like we could get a plane, 6 planes built within a week or something like that. Like, that's insane. We didn't have all these machines that were, able to put these pieces together. It was usually still by people welding ships together, welding metals, okay, making sure that, they're the ones responsible for putting screws into things, making sure that things are working like they should. And the Wartime Production and the War Industries Board that was in charge of all of this were probably one of the most efficient agencies in United States history, even compared to World War I. So impressive that we were able to, create all of this stuff and continue to create things. And like we're doing now with the coronavirus, we're shifting factories' original purpose to a different purpose to suit the national crisis. So whereas Ford was creating cars, he's going to change to making bombers, okay, planes that drop bombs. So when the United States government says, hey, big industry, do you mind helping us and maybe changing some of your factories to help with the war? We'll still pay you, obviously, and provide the materials. But if you change your business model to help us, would you mind doing that because if you do this, you're going to help the war and the war effort, and people are going to be saved by the end of this. We'll win the war if you help us. Are there any other questions that anybody wants to ask? Comments you want to make that I can comment on? What Mr. Roebuck did was just a great example of making a comment, pointing something out that he thought was interesting. Yeah. Hopefully we'll have more people join next week. I don't know. I know a couple people had class they had to go to at the same time as this. I told them they could join the next session at 11 with the Block 3 US 2 students. Hopefully they'll join us. Had we been in school, we would have gone through more of what FDR did, and you would have seen, just like with Woodrow Wilson, with Teddy Roosevelt, I tend to show you guys a darker side of these presidents. So internment camps, a lot of people don't remember internment camps. A lot of people don't know about them still. Like, people, when I say, what are internment camps? They're like, I have no idea. So when they think of FDR, they think of New Deal, winning World War II, elected 4 times. When really, that's not the only thing we should be looking at. We should be looking at every part of them. Like with Wilson, when we were saying he's a raging racist and everything, he also had very good qualities, right? He was... he wanted the League of Nations. The 14 points were very admirable. FDR, Japanese internment camps, packing the Supreme Court. He knew about the Holocaust. There is evidence that he did know about the Holocaust. Knowing about Pearl Harbor and not, working fast enough to stop it, or at least prepare people for it. There's a dark side to a lot of these presidents that usually gets forgotten in American history, and that we certainly don't cover in, we certainly don't cover a lot at the elementary or middle school level even. So it's up to the high school teachers to kind of show you guys the darker side. And again, not because we believe that, you should look at presidents and say that they were all bad or they're all good. But part of being educated is knowing that there's not one story. There's not a perfect person. Okay? Part of being educated is knowing how to look at a historical individual, an individual who's in politics today, and being able to determine between what good things they're doing and what bad things they're doing, and never making an overall judgment of saying that person was, a bad person because of X, Y, and Z, when they did A, B, and D, which were great things, Hi, Victoria. So, my grandfather lived in an internment camp with his parents. Really? That's interesting. Did he tell you guys stories about them? Like what it was like and the conditions and everything? Was he in a Japanese internment camp, one of the Italian or German ones? If you feel comfortable sharing, of course. Landon, if you want to say anything, I still see you up there. Yep, Mr. Roebuck was right. After the Executive Order 9066 was passed, the Japanese had 48 hours to kind of get their stuff, settled, their affairs in order. Sell your businesses, sell your possessions, your house, everything that you need to get rid of, because in 48 hours you're going to a camp. Okay, and a lot of these kids didn't understand what was happening. There's a great book called what's it called? Baseball Saved Us. It's a great children's book. It's a picture book of what it was like for a kid to suddenly leave his life in New York and go to... Was he in New York? I think he was in New York. Leave his life in New York and go to a internment camp. And what it was like there, and then what it was like afterward. Okay? Japanese... They weren't compensated until the 80s, that's right. Victoria, his mom was a teacher and an electrician. Okay. So they were... Okay, so you're making a good point. So even though his mother was a teacher, his father was an electrician, these are still people that we would probably say are vital to the continuation of society. So the American government didn't really give two hoots about who they were throwing in these camps as long as we were keeping America safe. He lived in a Japanese camp. He would go to school with them and play baseball. He said that when the adults would play, it was better than big leagues. I'm sure it was. Baseball, like I said, that in that children's book, baseball was a huge thing. If you're just sitting in a camp for a couple years, and you really have nothing to do, baseball, sports, anything that's going to remind you of what it's like at home. Because remember, baseball was a big thing in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. You're going to do whatever you can to make things seem normal, right? You're going to try to do your best to feel like you're at home. So these internment camps, I just want to drive this point home, had terrible, 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 terrible conditions. They weren't deadly conditions, but they weren't good conditions. So this is no for the camp. Right. So Victoria, what I meant was when they would play baseball in these camps. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So a lot of big stuff with Japanese internment. Again, I wish we were in school. I really would have loved to have showed you that book. I read through it with Mr. Sacco's class last semester, and they loved it. So I have a really good book for the bombing of Nagasaki when we get to that. It's a very descriptive, abstract art book showing a little girl who's sitting in her house, a little Japanese girl who's sitting in her house with her family eating breakfast. Suddenly the bomb goes off. Their bodies are scorched and burnt. It's a very good book. Very, very good. I spent hours. I know this is not quite... how do I say this? It's not quite right, but I would take... I would do a print screen on the book pages online, because there's a free website that lets you access any book. It's an internet archive. It's a very respectable, good site. I would take pictures of them and put them on PowerPoint so that we could go through them in class. Coral, was there any camps that were located in New Jersey? I don't believe so. Most of them were in the Midwest. Okay, so like Kansas, Oklahoma, remember all of those. They were in the middle of nowhere. So to come to New Jersey, which is so close to New York, which is so close to DC, they really didn't want to bring the Japanese closer to major cities. They wanted to keep them in isolated areas in the middle of nowhere, right? Because A, we don't want them to be able to escape and hurt us, and B, we really don't want the American people snooping around and seeing what these camps are like. You know, the last thing we need right now is criticism. This is from the point of view of the government. Were there ever any Japanese Americans accused of spying during World War II? Yes. Yes, there were a lot and accused of spying, not just from the government, but from neighbors. Okay? In the children's book, I keep bringing this up, but in the children's book that I bring up, or that I show you guys, the child who's talking looks at people and starts saying, you know, after Pearl Harbor, people started looking at us much differently. People made comments at us. People made racially insensitive and discriminatory and racist remarks towards Japanese Americans. Because, remember, racism is a big thing. And the other thing is, you know, people are scared, right? So I'm more likely to accuse my neighbor, who just happens to be Japanese, or of Japanese descent rather, of being a spy, especially if I have somebody who's fighting in the war, right? If I have somebody who's fighting in the war, I'm more likely to accuse my neighbor of being a spy, especially if they're Japanese, because I'm afraid our enemy looks like you, okay? So why wouldn't I be suspicious? Grave of the Fireflies is a good movie about Nagasaki. I will write that down and look into that. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, once we get to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's very interesting. I'll talk about this more when we actually get to that, but I have a friend who is mixed, and she's half Japanese, and she's very much against the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima because of the people it hit, the civilians that were killed and everything. I'll explain it much more in depth at a later time, but it's a very different view than what you're used to hearing. Do you think if other Americans saw what was going on, do you think they would try to stop the camps from happening? Honestly, no. I don't think they would have. Maybe Christian groups or religious groups in general, because I shouldn't have said Christian, it's not just Christian people. Maybe religious groups would have objected. Pacifists and socialists and communists definitely would have objected to this. However, again, racism is a big thing in this country, and, you know, had they been able to even speak out against this, like, there were people who spoke out against it. Korematsu, various people, there were a lot of people who spoke out against this, but after the Supreme Court decision that said, no, internment is allowed to be done, okay, we're in a time of war, the government is allowed to put people in camps. After that decision was made, there was really no objections that could be made to the American government because it was considered settled in the highest court in the country. Okay, the government has the right to do this. Okay, after this ruling, we really have no way to fight back against this except trying to, hide people or run away or flee. There really was no way to fight back. Okay. The only way you probably could have fought back was if you got in there somehow and got pictures. However, these camps were guarded by armed guards. Okay, so the likelihood of someone getting in and actually leaving was very slim. You could avoid internment if you enlisted. That's interesting. And Mr. Roebuck's mom was born in Honshu, Japan after World War II. Oh, that's cool. That's very interesting. I wonder how the Japanese looked at her as... I'm assuming she was American. I probably shouldn't make that assumption, but if she was American, I wonder how they would look at her. Japanese culture is very interesting, and it's a very, very, very complex society that fundamentally changes after the bombings. However, looking at internment itself, it's yet another time where civil liberties were infringed upon. We talked about the Espionage and Sedition Acts in World War I. We talked about various violations of civil liberties during Prohibition with the Palmer raids and other things. There was a lot of times in American history where the government kind of stepped in and said, hey, this is a difficult and touchy situation. These are dangerous times for the good of our people. We know what's best for you. We're going to step in and we're going to infringe on your civil liberties. In this case, it was to keep you all safe. We're going to put all of the Japanese Americans who could be spies, who could be sympathetic to the Japanese, in camps to protect us, to make sure that we have an eye on these people, right? So I see that we now have 8 people in. The 8th person, could you please identify yourself and perhaps ask a question so I know who's in? We are keeping track of who is coming online and participating so that you can get maximum amount of points. Any other questions or comments you'd like to contribute? I don't want to keep you on much longer because I know that you have to do stuff for other classes and we're about hitting our limit, so... Hey, Mateo! Thanks for joining us. You want to ask a comment or question before we wrap this up? Oh, hi, Jesse! Jesse, you can come back at 11 because we're about to wrap this up. If you want to come back at 11 for Block 3's live chat, please do. It's good to hear from you. Mateo, if you want to throw in a question or anything or a comment, feel free to. That would be awesome. Again, guys, I'm super appreciative if you come to these live chats. They are worth points, but more than that, it's good to hear from you guys and and this is a good way for me to answer any of your questions. Yeah. So Mateo, if you have anything to say, now's the time. All right, I'll see you soon, Jesse. Any final questions, comments, concerns? I hate when the live chat goes silent. Give you guys like another couple minutes and then we'll wrap it up. Yes. Goodbye, Mr. Roebuck. Have a good one. Please, guys, remember to answer the daily question every day. You get a point for it every single day, so make sure you're answering them. Make sure you're keeping up with your work. An announcement I made to the World Kids. Please note that all work is now due on Sunday. Okay, Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So I will post work on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay, everything that we do that week is due on Sunday. Okay, feel free to hand it in beforehand so that you can stay organized. That's totally fine. However, I will be grading after I post things on Monday. okay? Because I'm usually not up on Sundays at 1 o'clock in the morning. All right. So if there's nothing else, I hope everybody's happy and healthy. Remember to wash your hands and cover your mouth. And I will now sign off. If you need anything, please email us, comment on Google Classroom. We're going to try our best to get back to you. Mr. Roebuck and I are consistently checking the email in the Google Classroom. Every time you guys comment, it sends us an email, so we're trying to skim through those. Okay. Enjoy your time at home. Relax, rest, stay healthy, keep up with your work for all your classes. If you need anything, let us know. It's great to hear from you guys, and I will see you all next week. All right, bye-bye.